I still remember the exact moment my world tilted sideways. I was walking into the office Monday morning, coffee in hand, when I spotted my boss standing by the conference room with the biggest, smuggest grin I'd ever seen on his face. Next to him stood a kid who couldn't have been older than 23, wearing an expensive suit that screamed, "I've never earned anything myself." My boss, Marcus, waved me over with an enthusiasm that immediately set off alarm bells. "Elena, perfect timing. I want you to meet Ryan. He's my nephew, just graduated from business school." Ryan extended his hand limply, barely making eye contact. My stomach dropped as Marcus continued. "Ryan's going to be learning the ropes here. I need you to train him on everything you do." The way he said everything made my blood run cold. I forced a smile, shaking Ryan's clammy hand while my mind raced. Train him? On everything I do? After 6 years of building client relationships, streamlining processes, and basically running this department single-handedly. Marcus clapped Ryan on the shoulder. "He's a fast learner. Give him a few weeks, and he'll be ready to take over your position entirely." Take over. Those 2 words echoed in my head like a death sentence. I was being replaced by a kid who probably couldn't even work a spreadsheet. I walked to my desk in a daze, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my coffee, barely registering the heat of the cup. Around me, the office continued its normal rhythm. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the copy machine humming, but everything felt distant, muffled. Sarah from accounting glanced my way, then quickly looked down at her papers. Tom, who usually joked with me every morning, suddenly became very interested in his computer screen. They knew. Everyone knew what was happening, and nobody would meet my eyes. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. 6 years. 6 years of coming in early, staying late, fixing Marcus's mistakes, landing major clients, and this was my reward? Being forced to train my own replacement, some spoiled nephew who got handed a position I'd worked my entire career to build? I clenched my fists under my desk, fingernails digging into my palms. The rage was so intense I could taste it, sharp and metallic, but I couldn't let it show. Not yet. Marcus was watching me from across the room, probably expecting me to cry or quit on the spot. Instead, I took a deep breath, opened my email, and began typing notes. If Marcus thought I'd just roll over and accept this, he was dead wrong. By noon, Marcus had dumped a massive assignment on my desk. "I need you to create a comprehensive onboarding document for Ryan," he said casually, as if he were asking me to make copies. "Include everything: client accounts, our internal systems, strategy documents, vendor contacts, quarterly projections, everything that makes this department tick." I stared at the pile of folders he'd placed beside my keyboard. He wanted me to hand over my entire professional knowledge on a silver platter. The audacity was breathtaking. "When do you need this by?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "End of the week." Marcus smiled that infuriating smile. "I know it's a lot, but you're the best person for the job. Nobody knows this department like you do." The compliment felt like a slap. He was praising me while actively replacing me. I wanted to throw the folders at his face, but instead I nodded. "I'll get started right away." As Marcus walked away, I noticed Ryan lounging in the break room, scrolling through his phone and laughing at something on the screen. This was the person taking over my life's work? Someone who couldn't even pretend to look professional on his first day? I pulled the first folder toward me and began reading. But I wasn't just reading. I was analyzing, noting every discrepancy, every shortcut Marcus had taken, every corner he'd cut that I'd had to quietly fix. Training Ryan was worse than I'd imagined. The kid knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. On his second day, I explained our client management system, something I'd designed myself to track communications, deadlines, and account details. Ryan stared at the screen like I was speaking a foreign language. "So wait," he interrupted for the 3rd time. "Why can't we just use email for all this?" I bit back a sigh. "Because we handle 47 active accounts. Email gets messy. This system keeps everything organized, searchable, and backed up automatically." He shrugged. "Seems complicated. I'd probably just use email." Of course he would. He'd probably lose half our clients within a month. I walked him through our biggest account, a manufacturing company worth $3 million annually. I explained the contact person's preferences, the quarterly review schedule, the specific reporting format they required. Ryan took exactly 0 notes. When I asked if he had questions, he just said, "Yeah, I got it," while clearly not getting any of it. Meanwhile, Marcus kept popping by to check on Ryan's progress. "How's my star pupil doing?" he'd ask, ruffling Ryan's hair like he was a golden retriever. Ryan would grin and say everything was going great. Marcus never once asked how I was handling all this. The injustice of it made me want to scream, but I kept my expression neutral, my voice patient, while mentally cataloging every single thing Ryan didn't understand. As I trained Ryan, I started noticing things I'd deliberately ignored before. Marcus wasn't just a mediocre manager, he was actively bad at his job. I'd spent years covering for him, fixing his mistakes before they reached upper management, smoothing over his blown deadlines with clients. I began documenting everything. Every email where Marcus promised something he couldn't deliver. Every meeting where he made decisions without consulting actual data. Every time he took credit for work I'd done. I created a private folder on my personal laptop at home and started copying files. The contract he'd nearly lost because he forgot to follow up for 3 weeks, I had the email chain. The budget projection he'd miscalculated by 30%, I had the spreadsheets showing my corrections. The client complaint he'd ignored until I stepped in, I had the documentation. Late one night, I was going through Marcus's old reports to investors when I found something interesting. He'd been consistently overstating our department's performance. Not by huge amounts, just enough to make himself look good. 5% here, 7% there. Small lies that added up to a very misleading picture of our success. I screenshot everything, organized it chronologically, and saved it with careful file names. I didn't know exactly how I'd use this information yet, but I knew it was powerful. Marcus had been playing games with investor money and company resources. That wouldn't look good if the right people found out. The next morning, I was surprised when Sam from the IT department stopped by my desk. He was young, quiet, and usually kept to himself. "Hey, Elena," he said softly, glancing around to make sure nobody was listening. "I just wanted to say, I think what's happening to you is really unfair." I looked up, startled. Nobody else had acknowledged the situation at all. "Thanks, Sam. That means a lot." He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "If you ever need anything like, I don't know, help within that, files or data or whatever, let me know." Quietly. I studied his face. He was serious. "Why would you risk that? Marcus could fire you too?" Sam shrugged. "Because it's wrong. You've always been decent to everyone here. Marcus treats people like tools. And Ryan," he shook his head. "That kid doesn't know the difference between ram and wrong. He definitely shouldn't be running anything important." A small spark of hope flickered in my chest. I wasn't completely alone. I'll keep that in mind. "Thank you, Sam." He nodded and walked away quickly. I watched him go, my mind already turning. Having someone in IT who understood computer systems and could access certain files might be extremely useful. I didn't have a complete plan yet, but pieces were starting to fall into place. Maybe Marcus had made a mistake. Maybe his arrogance would be his downfall. And maybe, just maybe, I could make sure he faced real consequences for what he was doing. The breaking point came during our weekly team meeting. Marcus gathered everyone in the conference room to discuss quarterly targets. I'd prepared the presentation, as always, detailed slides showing our progress, client feedback, and projections for next quarter. But when the meeting started, Marcus didn't call on me. Instead, he gestured to Ryan. "My nephew has some fresh perspectives on how we can modernize our approach. Ryan, why don't you share your thoughts?" Ryan stood up, looking far too confident for someone who'd been here less than 2 weeks. He launched into a rambling speech about synergizing our client touchpoints and leveraging digital transformation. It was pure buzzword nonsense with zero substance. Then he said it. "Elena's methods are pretty outdated. She's been doing things the same way for years. We need younger energy, fresh thinking." "No offense, Elena." The room went silent. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I felt heat rising in my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. "None taken," I said evenly. "Though I'd be curious which specific methods you find outdated." Ryan floundered. Just the general approach. It's very old school." "Old school like maintaining a 97% client retention rate?" I asked. Or old school like bringing in 4 new major accounts last year? Marcus jumped in quickly. Elena, we appreciate everything you've done. We're just exploring new strategies. He smiled at Ryan. Great ideas, Ryan. Let's implement some of these changes. I sat through the rest of the meeting in silence, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Marcus was actively humiliating me, and Ryan was too stupid to realize he was being used as a weapon. After that meeting, I started watching Ryan more carefully. What I discovered was almost funny, if it weren't so infuriating. Ryan wasn't just incompetent. He was actively covering up his mistakes and lying about his progress. He'd told Marcus he'd completed a client report that I knew for a fact he hadn't even started. When I'd checked his work on a budget spreadsheet, half the formulas were wrong, but he'd marked it as finished. He'd missed a deadline with a vendor and then blamed it on not receiving the information in time, even though I'd emailed him everything he needed days earlier. The kid was building a house of cards, and eventually it would collapse. But Marcus was so blinded by family loyalty that he couldn't see it. I started documenting Ryan's failures too. Screenshots of his emails claiming work was done when it wasn't. Photos of his error-filled spreadsheets before I quietly corrected them. Records of meetings he'd skipped. Everything. One afternoon, I watched Ryan take credit for a client proposal I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. He presented it to Marcus as his own work, adding some meaningless jargon to make it sound like he'd improved it. Marcus praised him enthusiastically. I said nothing. I just added it to my growing file of evidence. Let them think Ryan was succeeding. Let Marcus think his brilliant plan was working. The higher they climbed on their tower of lies, the harder they'd fall when the truth came out. And I was going to make sure the truth came out. I spent a long weekend at home, organizing everything I'd collected. I had emails, reports, spreadsheets, screenshots, a mountain of evidence showing Marcus's mismanagement and Ryan's incompetence. But I needed to be strategic. Going to HR would accomplish nothing. Marcus had worked here for 15 years and had friends in high places. Then I remembered something. Our company had an internal audit department that reported directly to the board of investors. They were supposed to investigate any potential mismanagement of resources or funds. What if someone anonymously tipped them off about issues in Marcus's department? I created a new email address using a public library computer. Then I carefully drafted a message. Nothing too specific, just enough to raise red flags. I mentioned concerns about inflated performance reports, mismanaged accounts, and questionable hiring practices based on family connections, rather than qualifications. I attached a few key documents, the reports where Marcus had overstated our numbers, the timeline of Ryan's hiring despite having no experience, a comparison of our actual performance versus what Marcus reported to executives. Before hitting send, I hesitated. This was the point of no return. Once I did this, there would be consequences. But then I thought about that meeting, about Ryan's smug face, about Marcus's complete disregard for my 6 years of dedication. I hit send. The email disappeared into the void. I didn't know if anything would come of it, but at least I'd planted a seed. Sometimes that's all you need. Ryan's arrogance grew every day. By his 3rd week, he was acting like he owned the place. He'd waltz in late, leave early, and spend half the day on personal calls. But whenever Marcus was around, Ryan would suddenly look busy and engaged. The worst part was watching him claim my achievements. In a company-wide email, Marcus praised Ryan for innovative strategies that improved client satisfaction. Those strategies were my system that I'd implemented 2 years ago. Ryan had literally done nothing except learn how to use the software. At lunch, I overheard Ryan telling Sarah from accounting, "Yeah, Elena's teaching me stuff, but honestly, a lot of it needed updating anyway. I'm basically redesigning the whole department." Sarah made a non-committal sound. I saw her glance at me with sympathy, but she didn't contradict him. Nobody did. Nobody wanted to risk getting on Marcus's bad side. I ate my sandwich slowly, listening to Ryan spin his fantasy version of events. Let him talk. Let him build himself up. The more he bragged, the more evidence I had of his lies. That afternoon, Ryan made a significant mistake on a client presentation. Instead of admitting it, he told Marcus that I'd given him wrong information. Marcus didn't even check. He just assumed Ryan was telling the truth and gave me a lecture about being more careful with training materials. I apologized, corrected the mistake, and saved the email chain, proving Ryan had ignored my clear instructions. Another piece for my collection. Late nights became my routine. After everyone left the office, I'd stay behind, working on what I privately called the report. It was a comprehensive analysis of our department, the real version, not Marcus's inflated fantasy. I included actual client retention rates, accurate revenue figures, and honest assessments of our challenges. I documented every instance where Marcus had overpromised and underdelivered. I showed the timeline of my contributions versus his claims of department success. Then I added a section on Ryan. His lack of qualifications, the nepotistic hiring process, his repeated mistakes, and the risks he posed to client relationships. I was careful to stick to facts. No emotions, no personal attacks, just cold, hard data. I also created a comparison. Here's what the department looked like under my management. Here's what started happening after Ryan arrived. The difference was stark. The most damaging section analyzed Marcus's reports to investors. I placed his numbers side by side with the real numbers. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore. He'd been systematically misleading the people who'd invested money into our company. I worked on this for 3 weeks, perfecting every detail, checking every source. It had to be bulletproof. If I was going to take Marcus down, there could be no holes in my evidence. By the time I finished, the report was 40 pages of undeniable truth. I saved multiple copies in multiple locations. This was my weapon, and I was almost ready to use it. My friend Jessica worked in the legal department. We had lunch together for years, though lately I'd been too busy with my secret project. When she finally cornered me in the break room, she looked concerned. "Elena, I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Marcus has a reputation. 3 years ago, someone in his old department tried to file a complaint about him. That person was fired within a week for performance issues that mysteriously appeared in their file after they spoke up." My blood ran cold. "Are you serious?" "Completely. Marcus has connections with the VP of operations. He's protected, if you're thinking about fighting back." She trailed off, worry written all over her face. "Just be careful. Make sure whatever you do, it's ironclad. He'll destroy you if you give him the chance." I thanked her for the warning, but inside, my determination only hardened. Marcus thought he was untouchable. That made him careless, and carelessness left openings. That night, I reviewed my report again with fresh eyes. Was it ironclad? Could Marcus wriggle out of this? I went through every claim, every number, every piece of evidence. I imagined the toughest questions investors could ask, and made sure I had answers. Then I added one more section, a comparison with industry standards showing how other companies handled nepotistic hiring and performance reporting. I wanted to make it crystal clear that Marcus wasn't just a bad manager. He was a liability. My plan had to be perfect, because I'd only get one shot. The disaster I'd been waiting for finally happened. Ryan was supposed to handle a presentation for our biggest client, a quarterly review worth over $3 million. I'd prepared all the materials, walked him through every slide, and explicitly told him to double-check the financial figures before the meeting. He didn't. Instead, he presented outdated numbers from the previous quarter. The client's CFO immediately noticed the discrepancy and asked pointed questions. Ryan panicked, stumbled over his words, and basically admitted he hadn't actually prepared anything. The client was furious. After the meeting, they sent a scathing email to Marcus, copying the company president. It was bad, the kind of bad that could lose an account. I expected Marcus to finally see the truth about Ryan. Instead, he called me into his office and blamed me. "You were supposed to train him properly. This makes our entire department look incompetent. How could you let this happen?" I stood there, stunned. I gave Ryan the correct materials 3 days ago. I walked him through everything. This was his responsibility. "He says you never explained the financial reporting structure clearly." Marcus's voice was cold. "This is on you, Elena." Ryan stood behind Marcus, avoiding my eyes. The coward couldn't even defend himself or admit his mistake. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said calmly, "I have the email I sent with all the instructions. I can forward it to you." "Don't bother," Marcus snapped. "Just fix this mess. Write an apology to the client and redo the entire report." I left his office shaking with rage, but I also felt a grim satisfaction. I had saved that email, I had proof, and this incident was going straight into my documentation. That night, I got strategic. I needed irrefutable evidence that even Marcus couldn't spin. So I started arranging my documentation to tell an undeniable story. I organized emails chronologically, showing a clear pattern. Marcus making decisions without data, Ryan making mistakes, me cleaning up both their messes while receiving zero credit. I included timestamps proving when I'd sent instructions to Ryan, when he'd ignored them, and when problems occurred as a direct result. For the client disaster, I created a timeline. Day 1, I sent Ryan the materials. Day 2, I followed up with detailed instructions. Day 3, I offered to review his presentation. He declined. Day 4, the disastrous meeting. Day 5, Marcus blamed me despite evidence showing Ryan's failure. I added Marcus's response emails to the file where he praised Ryan and criticized me for the exact same incident. The contradiction was obvious. Then I did something clever. I created a side-by-side comparison document. On one side, Marcus's official reports to investors. On the other side, the actual data from our systems. The numbers didn't match. Not even close. I highlighted every discrepancy in yellow. By the time I finished, the pages looked like they'd been dipped in sunshine. There was no way anyone could look at this and not see the problem. I saved everything to a secure cloud account, backed it up to 2 flash drives, and kept detailed records of where every piece of evidence came from. If anyone questioned my sources, I could prove everything. The next morning, I discovered something interesting. Our quarterly investor meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. This was when the board members and key investors reviewed department performance and decided on budget allocations for the next quarter. Marcus always presented at these meetings, showing his carefully edited version of reality. But this year, the investors had requested more detailed documentation from all department heads. They wanted to see actual numbers, not just polished presentations. This was my opportunity. This was the stage where truth would matter more than Marcus's charm and connections. Investors cared about one thing, their money. If I could show them Marcus was mismanaging funds and misleading them about performance, they'd act. I started preparing a comprehensive performance review that looked like a standard audit document but actually contained all my evidence. I framed it as helpful information for the investors. Detailed breakdowns of account management, client retention strategies, resource allocation, and personnel performance. I made it look professional, objective, and thoroughly researched. Nothing in the language suggested revenge or personal grievance. It simply presented facts. Here's what was reported, here's what actually happened, here's the gap, and here are the implications for investor returns. The beauty of it was that Marcus wouldn't see it coming. He'd be expecting his usual song and dance. Instead, the investors would have real data showing exactly how he'd been manipulating their information. I worked on this revised report for hours every night, perfecting every word. Meanwhile, Ryan's confidence had reached absurd levels. He spent most of his time planning his presentation for the investor meeting, apparently convinced he was going to wow everyone with his vision for the department. I watched him practice in the conference room one afternoon. He'd taken my training notes, the comprehensive guides I'd created over years, and was presenting them as his own innovative ideas. He didn't even have the decency to reword anything. As you can see, Ryan said to his imaginary audience, I've developed a systematic approach to client retention that prioritizes relationship building and consistent communication. That was literally word for word from my training manual, the one I'd written 3 years ago. But Ryan was too arrogant to realize how badly he was setting himself up. He genuinely believed he could take credit for my work and nobody would notice. He thought Marcus's protection made him invincible. What Ryan didn't understand was that investors didn't care about family relationships or office politics. They cared about competence and returns on their money, and Ryan had neither. I smiled to myself as I watched him stumble through basic questions he'd imagined an investor might ask. He couldn't answer them because he didn't actually understand the work. He'd memorized my words without comprehending the concepts behind them. Good. Let him be overconfident. Let him walk into that meeting thinking he's prepared. The fall would be so much more satisfying. Sam from IT caught me in the parking lot one evening. "I found something you might want to see," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure we were alone. He handed me a flash drive. Marcus has been deleting emails from the company server. Old conversations with clients, performance reviews, documentation of problems. I noticed it when I was doing routine backups. He's covering his tracks. My heart raced. "Can you prove it?" "Already did. I pulled the access logs showing when files were deleted and who deleted them. It's all on here, along with recovered copies of what he erased." Sam looked nervous but determined. "This is bad, Elena. He's destroying evidence. That's not just bad management. It could be fraud." I stared at the flash drive in my hand. This was even bigger than I'd thought. Marcus wasn't just incompetent. He was actively trying to hide his mistakes from people who had a right to know. "Thank you, Sam. Seriously. You're taking a huge risk." He shrugged. "Someone has to do the right thing. Besides, I kept copies of everything in secure backups he doesn't know about. If he tries to throw me under the bus, I've got insurance." I went home that night and added Sam's evidence to my report. The deleted emails showed Marcus hiding client complaints, covering up budget overruns, and erasing documentation of his poor decisions. Combined with everything else, the picture was devastating. Marcus had been building a house of lies, and I had the wrecking ball. The night before the investor meeting, I finalized my report. It was now 52 pages of comprehensive, documented, undeniable truth. Every claim was backed by evidence. Every number was verified. Every timeline was accurate. The executive summary alone was damning. Systematic misrepresentation of department performance, nepotistic hiring practices that compromised client relationships, deliberate deletion of critical documentation, and financial discrepancies between reported and actual figures. I'd included specific examples of how Marcus's decisions had cost the company money. The blown deadline that almost lost a major client. The budget miscalculations that led to overspending. The projects that failed because he ignored expert advice. I documented Ryan's complete lack of qualifications and the risks his continued employment posed. Not out of spite. I genuinely showed how his mistakes were already costing us clients and could lead to bigger losses. The final section was my favorite. I'd created a projection model showing what the department's performance could look like with proper management versus the declining trajectory under Marcus's leadership. The difference was stark and expensive. I made 10 copies of the report, each professionally bound and labeled confidential, investor review, department analysis. I'd personally deliver one to each board member and key investor before the meeting tomorrow. As I sealed the reports in large envelopes, I felt a strange calm. This was it. 6 years of hard work, weeks of documentation, and one final play. Whatever happened next, at least I'd fought back. I wouldn't go down quietly. The morning of the investor meeting, I arrived early and placed sealed copies of my report outside each board member's office with a note. "For your review before today's quarterly meeting. Time-sensitive information regarding Department 7 performance metrics." Then I sat at my desk and waited. Marcus arrived an hour later, looking confident in his expensive suit. Ryan trailed behind him, carrying a briefcase that probably contained nothing but his overinflated ego. "Big day," Marcus said to the office at large. "Ryan's going to show everyone what fresh leadership looks like." Several people nodded politely. I noticed Sarah exchange glances with Tom. Sam gave me the tiniest nod from across the room. My allies, small but significant. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. By noon, I'd noticed board members having urgent, hushed conversations in hallways. One of them stopped by our department and spoke briefly with Marcus, who looked confused but not yet worried. At 1:30, the company president's assistant came by. "Elena, could you join the investor meeting this afternoon? We may have questions about department operations." Marcus's head snapped up. Why would Elena need to be there? "I'm the department head." "The board requested her presence," the assistant said neutrally. 2 o'clock, conference room A. Marcus looked at me suspiciously, but I kept my expression blank. Inside, my heart hammered. They'd read my report, they had questions, and they wanted me there to explain. This was happening. This was really happening. The conference room was intimidating. 12 people sat around a massive table: board members, major investors, the company president, and the CFO. Marcus and Ryan sat on one side, looking increasingly confused. I was directed to sit opposite them. The lead investor, a stern woman named Patricia, opened the meeting. Before we begin the standard presentations, we need to address some concerning information that's come to our attention. She held up my report. Marcus's face went pale. Ryan looked lost. This analysis suggests significant discrepancies between reported and actual department performance, Patricia continued. Marcus, can you explain why your quarterly reports show revenue figures that don't match our accounting records? Marcus stammered. Those numbers are based on projections, and no, the CFO interrupted, flipping through his copy of my report. These are numbers you listed as actual completed revenue. But according to our finance department, these deals haven't closed yet. Some haven't even been finalized. I watched Marcus squirm. He tried to blame accounting errors, timing issues, misunderstandings. Every excuse sounded weaker than the last. Then Patricia turned to me. Elena, you prepared this analysis. Can you walk us through your findings? I took a deep breath. This was it. Of course. I've been managing our major accounts for 6 years. The numbers in my report come directly from our client management system, verified against signed contracts and actual payment records. I can show you exactly where each discrepancy originates. And I did. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically destroyed Marcus's carefully constructed lies. Marcus tried to fight back. This is clearly a disgruntled employee trying to undermine management, he argued. Elena has been difficult ever since I brought Ryan in to modernize our processes. I stayed calm. I have documentation for every claim in that report. If you'd like, I can provide the source files, email chains, and system records that verify each number. One of the investors spoke up. I'd like to see that documentation, actually. Especially regarding the client account Marcus claimed was worth $4 million. Your report says it's actually worth $2.8 million. I pulled out my laptop and projected the actual signed contract onto the screen. The investor read it carefully, then looked at Marcus with cold eyes. This is a significant overstatement that directly affects our return calculations. Marcus's face turned red. That was a projected value based on expansion clauses, which haven't been triggered and may never be, the CFO said sharply. You reported it as current revenue. Then Patricia asked the question I'd been waiting for. Let's talk about Ryan. Elena, your report suggests his hiring was problematic. Can you elaborate? I chose my words carefully. Ryan is Marcus's nephew. He was hired without going through standard recruitment processes. He has no prior experience in our industry. Since starting 5 weeks ago, he's made several significant errors that have damaged client relationships. That's not true, Ryan burst out. I've been doing great. Marcus, tell them. But Marcus couldn't, because everyone in that room was now looking at the section of my report that documented Ryan's mistakes, including the disastrous client presentation that nearly cost us $3 million. I have the client's complaint email if you'd like to see it, I said quietly. The investors began asking rapid-fire questions, and Marcus couldn't answer most of them. When was this project completed? What was the actual client satisfaction score? Why were 3 key employees listed as working on accounts they'd never been assigned to? Ryan tried to jump in once. I can explain the client management strategy. Patricia cut him off. How long have you been in this position? 5 weeks, but I've learned. And before this, what was your experience in client management? Ryan floundered. I have my MBA and my uncle. Your uncle. Patricia's voice could have frozen water. She turned to the company president. We have a clear nepotism issue here, combined with what appears to be systematic misrepresentation of performance metrics. The CFO was going through the section about deleted emails. Sam Fletcher from IT provided evidence that department files were deliberately deleted from the company server. Marcus, do you want to explain why you were erasing documentation? Marcus had gone from red to pale. Those were just routine cleanups of old files, including client complaints and performance reviews. The CFO's tone made it clear he wasn't buying it. That's not routine cleanup. That's destroying evidence. I sat quietly, watching Marcus's world collapse. Every lie he'd told was being exposed. Every corner he'd cut was being examined. And he had no defense except excuses that sounded more desperate by the minute. Ryan looked like he might cry. He'd finally realized he was way out of his depth. Patricia stacked her papers decisively. I think we've seen enough. We need to discuss restructuring. The restructuring happened fast. Within a week, Marcus was demoted to a junior management position with no direct reports. Ryan was reassigned to an entry-level role in a completely different department, essentially admitting the original hiring was a mistake. The board called me in separately to discuss my future. Patricia sat across from me, her expression thoughtful. You could have quit when Marcus started this nonsense. Why didn't you? Because I built this department, I said simply. I wasn't going to let him destroy it just because he wanted to hand it to his nephew. She nodded. We're offering you Marcus's position, department head, with a significant raise and a seat in management meetings. Interested? Part of me wanted to jump at it, but I'd spent weeks thinking about what I really wanted, and it wasn't Marcus's old job. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I'd rather negotiate something different. I want a consulting role with equity options. I'll help restructure the department, train a proper management team, and stay on as an advisor. But I don't want to be locked into the same system that let Marcus get away with his behavior for so long. Patricia raised an eyebrow, then smiled. You know what? That's actually better for us too. Deal. We spent the next hour working out details. I'd get a generous consulting contract, stock options, and the freedom to work on my own terms. No more Marcus, no more office politics. Just clean, professional work with people who valued what I brought to the table. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I had in years. My last day in the office felt surreal. Sam helped me pack up my desk, grinning the whole time. You actually did it, he said. You took down Marcus and came out on top. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have gotten that email evidence without you. Sarah and Tom stopped by to say goodbye. We should have stood up for you earlier, Sarah admitted. We were just scared. I understood. Fear made people small, but courage, even quiet courage, could change everything. As I was leaving, I saw Ryan in the break room. He looked miserable, probably realizing he'd been used as a pawn in Marcus's games. Part of me felt sorry for him. He was young and stupid, not malicious. Hey, I said. For what it's worth, you could actually be good at this if you put in the work. You just need to stop taking credit for things you didn't do and start learning for real. He looked surprised. After everything, you're giving me advice? Just don't waste the second chance. I paused. And maybe be more careful about whose career you let someone destroy to boost your own. I walked out of that building for the last time, carrying a box of my personal items and a contract that would pay me more in 1 year than I'd earned in 6 years combined. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, and I realized I was smiling. Not a bitter smile or a vengeful one, just genuine happiness. Marcus had tried to erase me, to replace me with someone unqualified simply because they shared his blood. He'd thought he was untouchable, that his connections would protect him from consequences. But he'd forgotten something crucial. The truth, when properly documented and strategically presented, is more powerful than any protection. I loaded my box into my car and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, letting it all sink in. I'd fought back, I'd won, and I'd done it without compromising my integrity or stooping to Marcus's level. The evidence spoke for itself, because I'd been meticulous, patient, and smart. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica in legal. Drinks tonight to celebrate? You're officially a legend around here. I laughed and typed back, absolutely, I'm buying. As I drove away from that building, I didn't look back. That chapter was closed. Tomorrow I'd start planning my consulting business, reaching out to contacts, building something new, something mine. 3 months later, my consulting firm was thriving. I'd taken on 4 clients, all of them eager for someone who could actually analyze their operations honestly and help them improve. Word had spread quickly. There was a consultant who didn't just tell executives what they wanted to hear, but what they needed to know. I'd hired Sam as my technical director. He'd quit his job at the old company the week after I left, tired of watching incompetent managers make his life difficult. Together, we were building something based on competence and integrity, not politics and nepotism. One afternoon, I got an email from a young woman I didn't know. "Hi, Elena," it read. "I heard about what happened at your old company. I'm in a similar situation, being pushed out for my manager's friend. Your story gave me courage to start documenting everything. Thank you for showing me that fighting back is possible." I stared at that email for a long time, feeling something shift in my chest. My battle hadn't just been about me. It had been about every person who'd ever been unfairly replaced, dismissed, or undervalued. Every employee who'd watched less qualified people get promoted through connections instead of merit. I wrote back immediately, offering advice on documentation strategies, legal protections, and how to present evidence professionally. Over the next few weeks, I heard from more people, dozens of them, all sharing similar stories. That's when I realized my real purpose. I started a blog sharing strategies for employees facing unfair treatment. I wrote guides on documenting workplace issues, understanding employment law, and advocating for yourself professionally. I offered free consultations to people who couldn't afford legal help. The response was overwhelming. My story resonated because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about valuing your own worth, even when others didn't. It was about fighting smart instead of fighting loud. 6 months after leaving, I was invited to speak at a professional development conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, I told my story. I talked about the humiliation of being replaced, the rage of watching incompetence get rewarded, and the satisfaction of letting truth speak louder than politics. "They thought they could make me disappear," I said. "But here's what they didn't understand. You can't erase someone who knows their worth. You can't replace someone who's irreplaceable, and you definitely can't silence someone who's been taking notes the whole time." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, people lined up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. I spent hours talking to them, energized by their determination to stand up for themselves. That evening, I checked my email and saw a message from Patricia, the lead investor. "Thought you'd want to know. Marcus resigned today. Couldn't handle the demotion. Also, the department you restructured just had its best quarter in company history. Well done, Elena." I smiled and closed my laptop. Marcus was gone, his legacy tarnished by his own poor decisions. Ryan had apparently transferred to another company, hopefully having learned something from the experience. And me? I was building something bigger than a department or a job title. I was building a movement of people who refused to be pushed aside quietly. People who documented their worth, fought strategically, and demanded the respect they deserved. My phone buzzed with another message from someone asking for help with their workplace situation. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and started typing a response. Because this was my purpose now. Not just succeeding despite betrayal, but helping others do the same. Teaching people that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. Showing them that patience, preparation, and proof can overcome even the most entrenched unfairness. They'd tried to force me out. Instead, they'd created someone who would spend her career making sure others never felt as powerless as I once did. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to my younger self, the woman who'd walked into that office months ago and been told she was being replaced. She'd felt small and defeated in that moment. But she'd chosen to fight smart, and that choice changed everything. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't destroying your enemies. It was building something so successful, so meaningful, so undeniably valuable that your absence became their biggest regret. Marcus had tried to erase me. Instead, he'd given me the push I needed to become someone even better than who I was before. And honestly, I couldn't thank him enough.